maybe in this moment you're thinking, wow, I can really relate to Naomi in this. Like, I have suffered loss recently, or maybe you're struggling financially, or maybe you just got a bad report and you're like, I feel like the Lord's abandoned me. And you can really resonate with what Naomi's going through.
Hello, and welcome to Breakfast at Mom's.
There's a saying that it says it's not just about tying the knot, it's about keeping the knot tied.
I'll even tell y'all a little secret.
Do we want to know? I don't know.
I don't know.
When we're not feeling like we love them, we do. But we don't like them.
Mom guilt's a lie, because that's what I have to remind myself. But to most people, mom guilt is the feeling that you haven't done enough.
I did wait to get married. Again, it's okay to wait. I don't know how many times people are like, are you getting married soon? Did you find a guy? Did you scare another one away? You know.
But I do want to tell you I love you, and I am going to kiss you goodnight, even if you're both like, you know what I mean?
What was that?
While remaining on the same team as our partner.
Sorry.
Or where is this? I don't know that I want to know this.
La, 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 la.
Welcome to Champion Church Online, where our heart is to help you champion every season of your life. Wherever you are joining us from, we are glad you are with us, and we have put all of this together just for you. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe for daily ways to help you champion every season.
Today we're jumping into the book of Ruth, and as soon as I say Ruth, you probably think of this beautiful love story between Ruth and Boaz, a beautiful fairy tale. And while the book of Ruth has that, it also has some really dark, sad, and just real moments in it that I think that all of us can really relate to. And one thing you really need to know about the book of Ruth is that this book was written during the time of the Judges. And if we look at what Judges chapter 21-25 says, in those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. So people were doing whatever they wanted, however they saw fit for themselves, whatever they felt they did, and they just ignored the laws of the Lord. And I think a lot of us, that might sound familiar. Maybe where we are in this time in the world, you think that sounds like today's time. But the story of Ruth, what I love about this is we see God's people, some of God's people, stay true and stay in the faith. And we see how God blesses that in the end, that even though other people are doing what they want, we see the others going against the grain and really just going after what God wants them to do. And let's just go ahead and jump in today to Ruth chapter 1, verses 1-5. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judea went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephraimites from Bethlehem in Judea. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah and the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So right off the bat, we meet Elimelech, and we find that Elimelech and his family, his wife and his 2 sons, are traveling from Bethlehem, their hometown, and that there was a famine there. And so they're traveling from there. We don't really know the reason why they left. We just know that they left, and they went to this town of Moab. And within Moab, Elimelech dies. And right after the 2 sons, they end up marrying Moabite women. And what's kind of crazy about this is that Moabites and Israelites did not get along. Moabites were kind of the outcasts, and the Moabite women in particular had this reputation, you could say, for prostitution and even child sacrifice to satanic deities. And so it was just not a good situation for Israelites to marry Moabites. However, these 2 sons of Elimelech did, and one was named Orpah and the other was Ruth. And shortly after, within the 10 years, we see that the 2 sons die, and Naomi is left with her 2 daughter-in-laws. She is lost her husband. She has lost both her sons. And now, she's alone. She just has her 2 daughter-in-laws. And so what ends up happening is Naomi finds out that in Bethlehem that the famine is done and that the Lord has been providing them food. So she's decided, okay, girls, let's pack up and let's hit the road and let's go back to my homeland. And somewhere along this time, it doesn't really say if it was in the beginning, if it was halfway there, they were almost at Bethlehem, but she just changes her mind and she's like, wait a minute. Whether she has an epiphany, what the reason was, she's like, listen, I have nothing for y'all. I don't have any other sons. And if I were to marry today and have a son, would you really wait for him to be your husband, for him to be of age? Like, no, like you need to just go back to your land. You just need to go back home, let your parents take care of you and find husbands there. And in this moment, it brings us to our first lesson in Ruth, is lesson number 1. How we respond to situations in our lives affects those closest to us. So Naomi is grieving, and I'm sure she's so fearful of what's about to happen when she gets into Bethlehem. And she has, probably the weight of her daughter-in-laws, like, how am I going to provide for them? Plus me, like, they just need to go back. But in this moment, I think Naomi really misses the fact that her faith in God is not there. It's really just showing a distrust by sending the women back. And I think it's a good lesson for us that when we go through situations that people around us are looking at what we are going to do, how we are going to respond, and it affects their walk with the Lord. And we see in this moment, Ruth and Orpah are kind of, arguing back and forth with Naomi. And eventually Orpah is just like, okay, like I'll go back. And in my mind, as I read this book, I thought about Orpah and I thought about maybe did she really want to go originally with Naomi, or did she think that she had to go? And as soon as Naomi said that, was she like doing like a little backflip in her mind, like, yes, like I get to go back. And as she's saying no, I picture her just like putting her foot backwards and being like, are you sure, Naomi? Like I can stay. And as soon as, Naomi continues, Orpah just leaves. But we see something really cool happen. We see Ruth's response, and her response was complete opposite of Naomi. Let's look at it together. Ruth 1, verse 16 through 17. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. When you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. This brings us to our next lesson in Ruth, lesson 2. Trust God regardless of your circumstances. Naturally, for Ruth, the right decision would have been to go back to her homeland. Naomi was right. Naomi had nothing left to give Ruth. But what I find so cool about this is that somewhere within the 10 years of living with that Israelite family, Ruth became to know the God of Israel. She became to know his characteristics. And she was deciding in that moment, like, Naomi, 1, I choose to stay loyal to you. Like, I married into your family. I'm now a part of your family. And 2, she's like, okay, like, I don't want to go back to my little gods. Like, I know your God as the one true God, and that's who I want to follow. And I love that, just how much faith Ruth had in this moment. And let's continue reading. Ruth 1, 19 through 21. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? She said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt with me very bitterly. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? Because Naomi went through some really, really rough things. I mean, her husband died, her 2 sons died. Life had really taken a toll on her. And this is how I read the Bible, is like, I truly try to picture myself there and what these women look like. And she's just traveled this long journey. I'm sure her face is sunken in. I'm sure she's aged from this horrific tragedy she's just gone through. And now she shows up to her hometown and she's like, people are like, is that Naomi? Is it not? And some people ask her like, hey, Naomi, is that you? And Naomi's like, it is me, but don't call me Naomi. And I just picture her being like over the top dramatic, like, yes, it is me, but don't call me Naomi, because Naomi means pleasant, and I am bitter because the Lord has dealt with me bitterly. So please, from now on, call me Mara. And I went away with a husband and 2 sons, but I've come back with absolutely nothing. Okay. I don't know about you, but I instantly got offended for Ruth. Like, Ruth just pledged her loyalty on the road to Bethlehem, and here Naomi is pretty much calling her nothing, is how I heard it. And I don't know if that's how Ruth heard it, but that's what I think. And then I think of Ruth. I picture Ruth just standing there behind Naomi as Naomi's talking to these people. I picture her maybe with her head down, because here she is in this foreign land, a foreign land of Israelites, and she's a Moabite woman. She has this reputation from what people in Moab are doing. And I often wonder, like, were people like, whispering, looking at her, maybe judging her? And I think of Ruth in this time, and if it were me, I would be like, okay, God, like, I did a good thing. Like, I pledge my loyalty not only to Naomi, but God, really to you. Like, where are you in this? And oftentimes, how many of us have been there where we're like, okay, God, like, I've said yes to you. Why are my circumstances not changing? And that brings us to lesson number 3 from Ruth, which is our yes to God does not mean our circumstances will instantly be changed. We're still going to face trials and tribulations as followers of Christ. And Jesus even tells us in John 16:33, I have told you these things so that you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Maybe in this moment, Ruth had just peace. Like, she just knew that the God of Israel was going to take care of her, and Naomi's comment didn't bother her. We really don't know, but I personally think, and this is just my thoughts, is that Ruth was clinging on to what she had learned about who God was, and that's what kept her still and calm in that moment and kept her from keep taking those steps on the way to Bethlehem. And as this chapter ends, we see that Ruth and Naomi have really 2 big needs right now, and that's food, number 1, and family as the second one. And maybe in this moment, you're thinking, wow, I can really relate to Naomi in this. Like, I have suffered loss recently, or maybe you're struggling financially, or maybe you just got a bad report and you're like, I feel like the Lord's abandoned me. And you can really resonate with what Naomi's going through. And I just encourage you, stay with me and let's really see what the God of Israel does in this story, and know that what he does here, he can do for you at home. Ruth 2:1-3. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. So as soon as we read that, we get to meet Boaz for the first time, and we see that Ruth, they settled in Bethlehem, and Ruth's like, okay, I need to go out and find someone who gives me favor that I can glean in their fields. And gleaning was really a law from the Lord of his way of providing for the poor. And what would happen is that the farmers would go on the land and they would kind of pick up the grains in a certain area and leave like the corners and the edges alone, so the poor could come in and they could gather grains enough for that day to feed their family. And again, this was during the time of Judges, so people were doing what they want, and not everyone was letting the poor glean off their land. So that's why you hear Ruth say, I want to find favor with someone to glean off their property. So Ruth stumbles, just so happens. Nothing just so happens. We all know that the Lord has orchestrated this moment. And so Ruth just so happens to be on the land of Boaz. And that same day that she was out gleaning, Boaz shows up and he starts asking his workers, the reapers, like, hey, who is that? And they're like, oh, that's Ruth. That's Naomi's daughter-in-law. And instantly Boaz knew of her reputation and her loyalty to Naomi, and he tells the reapers, he's like, hey, listen, make sure you protect her. Let her glean all she wants. And not only just let her glean, make sure no one harms her, but also just leave bushels of grain just laying around for her to easily pick up. And so Ruth has found favor in the eyes of Boaz. And as she's gathering up for the day, she's gathering up her bushels. She comes home to Naomi, and I just picture her excitement of like, Naomi, like, look what I got for us. Like, we have food. And it's a good reminder in our next lesson from Ruth, which is God blesses obedience. Ephesians 3:20-21. Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works within us. Him to be the glory in the church by Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. God can do more than we could ever think, and he provides abundance. And that's what happens in this moment, is that Ruth goes out to glean just for their needs for that day. And we see the Lord not only provides the needs, but he gives even more. And I just think of her, just going in like super excited of what she has. And then we start to see as chapter 2 comes to a close that one of the two needs that Naomi and Ruth were in need of, the first one being food, has been fulfilled. And so now we see in chapter 3, we start seeing the seed being planted for what God's going to do for the next need, which is family. So let's go ahead and jump into Ruth 3. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. So this is where we really start to see a shift in Naomi. And Naomi comes to find out that the land that Ruth is gleaning in is on Boaz's land. And she knows Boaz as part of Elimelech's family. And back then, just to give you just a fun fact, back then, whenever someone was a widow, family members, there were certain order for family members to take care of them. And she knows that Boaz is one of those eligible men that could possibly take care of them and end up marrying Ruth. And so she, all of a sudden, this self-proclaimed bitter woman is now starting to turn a leaf, and she's like, wait a minute, like, this could be the next thing that God is providing. And Ruth, like, Boaz is eligible, like, you have to go after him. And again, we start seeing that shift, and it also brings us to our next lesson, which is lesson 5. Seek elderly godly advice. So Naomi, this woman, is now starting to see that, okay, maybe God does have a plan, and she starts to offer advice to Ruth. She starts to step into that godly woman role of being an elderly and just giving good godly advice to a woman. And up next, we're about to read is Naomi's plan. And Naomi's plan is a little crazy, a little wild, and a little bold. And so read with me in Ruth 3:3-4. Wash therefore and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, all that you say, I will do. Again, I told you, like, her plan is a little wild and out there. And as an elderly married woman, I am just going to go ahead and advise all of my singles out there, do not follow Naomi's advice, because remember, we are in a different time. And unlike Ruth, you are not going to find a husband. You are going to find yourself a restraining order. So again, it's just to be funny, but this really happened. Like, this is what Naomi told her. Naomi basically was like, listen, like, after he eats, after he has his wine, he's going to go into his room and he's just going to go to sleep. And what you're going to do is you're going to sneak into that room. You're going to uncover his feet and then just lay at his feet. And Ruth responds with not like, are you sure? Like, Naomi, like, are you sure? Like, there was no hesitation or doubt. It was, okay, I will do exactly what you say. And let's look at verse 9. He said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. So Boaz ends up waking up startled and is just kind of like, who are you and what are you doing here? And she explains who she was and tells him exactly what she's doing there. And what I find so interesting about this verse is that in chapter 2 is that Boaz prayed this exact prayer over Ruth about spreading your wings and finding protection. And he was talking about God, like he was praying that God would protect Ruth. And what Ruth is essentially coming in to ask him is, hey, like, can you be the guy that God uses to protect me and to provide for me? Will you marry me? And Boaz, as you continue reading, I just encourage you, like, go read this. It's a quick read. But as we continue to read it, you see that Boaz is like, I would love to marry you. Yes, but there's someone ahead of me. And it goes to our next lesson from Ruth, which is no matter how dire the circumstances seem, there is always a godly way to do things. And I love Boaz in this moment because as much as Boaz desired to be Ruth's husband, he knew that there was a right way to do this and that there was a man before him. And so he told Ruth, like, hey, listen, like, as much as I would love to, I've got to make sure that this other guy doesn't want to marry you first. So I'm going to sneak you out quietly out of my room so that your reputation is not ruined. And I'm going to send you on your way and I will let you know what happens. And that's how chapter 3 ends. And then we start chapter 4 with Boaz with this guy in front of back then, it's not called courts, but it's basically the courts where the elders gathered and they made the decisions and the rules and signed laws. Ruth 4:5-6. Then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So basically, Boaz goes to this guy, tells him about, hey, you're next in line to receive the land of Naomi and to take care of Naomi. But with that comes Ruth. And in my mind, as I'm reading this, I just picture Boaz going to this guy and he's like, hey, so, our cousin Naomi, like, you're in line to take care of her. Do you want her? And the guy's like, yeah. And he's like, well, if you take her, you've got to marry Ruth, the Moabite. You know what they say about Moabite women. And the guy, like, again, he doesn't say this, but this is just what I picture. And the guy is like, actually, no, like, I can't do that. So you can have the right to the land and to marry Ruth. And we see in this moment that Boaz did the right thing and the Lord blessed him in that. And let's continue reading down to verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife, and he went into her and the Lord gave her conception and she bore a son. So we see in chapter 1 starts and it's a hot mess. Like, there's so much sadness in it. And now we're at the very last chapter, and in one moment we see Ruth and Boaz marry and they have a child. And what I find so cool about this is that she was married for 10 years and there was never a child. There was just like this fruitlessness. And all in an instant, the Lord provided and blessed them with a child. And it brings us to our last lesson from Ruth, which is God is our ultimate redeemer. Naomi had probably felt super abandoned in the very beginning of this book, but we see how even with her just kind of bitterness and her inching away from the Lord, how much the Lord was still pursuing her. And we see how he even blesses her at the end of this book. And in Ruth 4:14, it says, Then the women said to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. So now the women who had came to Naomi wondering if it was her, and she's like, no, call me bitter, not pleasant, is now telling her, Naomi, you are so blessed. Like, look what the Lord has done, how he's redeemed this part of your life. And it's just a beautiful picture of how God can take something so tragic, how God can take your simple yes to following him and make this beautiful, grand gesture, and all these things just turn around for for his glory, but also to bless you and to provide and protect for you. And we see that with Ruth and Naomi. And we see at the end of chapter 4, the genealogy of Ruth and Boaz. And Ruth ends up becoming the great grandmother to King David, which, if you don't know, or maybe you do know, is that King David is the line of Jesus. And so here it is, this Moabite woman who had this bad reputation is now part of God's great plan for all humankind, which is the birth of Jesus. And I think that that is just incredible that she's part of that line. And it is such a good reminder and encourager for us as just people that God can use us with our simple yes. Maybe it's you're a first generation Christian. Like, think about what you are doing to set up for your children, for their children, for their children. It's like you are truly like making a path for God to use your entire family and to change, that line around. Or think about if you are opening a business or you have a business, and think about the financial just gift you are giving to generations to come. And I think that it's just such a beautiful picture that God can use you. And maybe like in Hebrews 11, it tells us that we might not all see the promises of God, but we can step in and help and start putting into motion those things and being a part of the bigger picture of what God wants for, again, all humankind. And I just hope today really encouraged you in that this love story was really a story that showed how much the Lord really loves us, and that if we just obey, he will guide us and he will bless us. Until next time.
Hey, before you go, make sure you subscribe for daily ways to champion every season.